Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tom Romero. The easiest designation of me is as director of IRISE, and it's a pleasure to see you all here today. Really thrilled to see such a great turnout, to feel the energy and the enthusiasm in the room. Before I turn it over and describe a little bit about what we're going to accomplish today, I just wanted to let you know, as we move into this era of sort of managing COVID-19, I want to let you all know, particularly in the spring quarter, all of IRISE's events, we're planning and preparing to do a lot more online sort of presentations, engagement, teach-ins. There's going to be a lot of programming coming up, but a lot of it's probably not going to necessarily be live, or at least in person, but it will be live. So just give you a heads up for that potential and possibility. We will be posting information as we can through our listserv. So if you haven't signed up for the IRISE listserv, please do so. You can do so as well by also going and checking out our website. We just relaunched a brand new website, and I encourage you all to take a look at our website and figure out all the ways that you can get involved with IRISE, as well as to get engaged with our work, which includes two of the people that you will see up here. So without further ado, I know you don't want to hear from me anymore, and you want to hear this wonderful conversation. We are having a conversation here today between two people, as I mentioned, that are critically important to the work of IRISE. And that includes two of our visitors this year that include Dr. Cheryl Matias and Sol Watson, who are our visiting faculty and our visiting community scholars. And they are here to talk about Dr. Matias's new book, which, as you see up here, is called Surviving Becky's Pedagogies for Deconstructing Whiteness and Gender. So without further ado, I guess one further point here. This is going to be a conversation. I passed out some pieces of paper, and so if you have questions that you want to ask as part of this engagement, this conversation, please write those questions down. I'll be sort of on the perimeters, and please feel free to pass those questions to me in the perimeters, and then I will be passing those to Sol for engagement in this conversation. So without further ado, let's have our conversation. And it's okay to clap and be excited.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see that people showed up to the event. That's fantastic, especially with everything going on. How many people are from Denver, Colorado? Okay, that's a good number. That's good to see. I'm really excited about this conversation. I think I'm a little bit more excited about it than I should be. Just the title alone, you know, when they say you had me at hello, you had me at the Surviving Becky's, and I think I was telling you, I had an experience this past, as most people of color have. Like this, you're not going to have to go far in order to relate to the. But I was working in coalition in order to flip the school board this year. And for those of you who know, if you're dealing with school boards, that's usually, for those of you from Denver, that's Southeast, middle, upper class, white women. And if you don't think that's a vicious group, then you haven't really been around that group enough to know exactly how vicious they can be. Nicety is what we call it, right? And so I'm really excited. This book is, as the youth would say, is giving me life right now. Let's just start off with some of the basics. I almost feel I already know what made you write the book, but what prompted you? What really made you sit down and say, okay, this is something that's needed, even in an academic circle? Why is this book needed?
Well, it's funny because people always say, you know, did you start doing research on whiteness off the get-go? I was like, heck no. I came to Colorado because I was going to bring the cool stuff of critical hip-hop pedagogies, culturally responsive teaching. Those of you that don't know me, I was a K-12 teacher in LA and New York City, Bed-Stuy. So these are important aspects, and as Denver is rapidly urbanizing, they've had me come over a decade ago to best prepare teachers. Yet, here's the kicker. I was one of the first faculty of color ever hired in the specific program of urban teacher education, and teaching. My students were majority white females, never had interactions with folks of colors, and they were about to teach urban students of color. And I found it so hard to get to the fun stuff like the critical hip hop. I mean, we were going to deconstruct some Tupac. I'm totally West Coast, you know. We were going to get into some bamboo and some, social justice rap, but we couldn't even go there because they couldn't even see my humanity. There was so much white resistance or white lash or backlash, racial, and these white fragility or emotionalities that were happening, so much so that they couldn't process any of the learning. So what led me to this work was I need to understand these pattern behaviors because it happens all over the US and beyond. So how can I understand this more in an academic world so that we can drive together and do better racial justice work in coalition? So that's the way, and then I'm in education. Being a teacher, I felt that many a times, bro. And it was funny because, you get a lot of white teachers and they're well-meaning, don't get me wrong. And white teacher educators, the professors teaching the teachers, and they're well-meaning. And they can be these experts on bilingual ed or black student educational pipelines and pathways, yet they find it so hard to accept me as this proud brown pinai in front of you, to say, hey, I'm an expert on white folks who think they're helping folks of color.
And do you think that's because academia itself, is the way that it's structured now, is rooted in pathologizing people of color and not having that mirror reflected back onto them, or whiteness being pathologized?
Oh, amen to that. Yes, absolutely. They call it the ivory tower, not the ebony and ivory tower.
Right.
So there's a historical root of why it's like this. I mean, at CU Denver, we are very cognizant at every commencement to say that back in the day, the university, during a time with anti-Semitism, they allowed the first Jews at the university. They don't talk about black students, but this is the history that we cannot deny. And that people who try to turn a blind eye, they'll engage in ahistoric arguments, Right. And so, it becomes a really important thing to, check yourself before you wreck yourself,
Right.
So and that's why I do
So, I'm looking at the cover, and it reminds me of something, again, for those people who are from Denver. I grew up on the east side, went to East and Manual. We have any angels here? Any? No? Any DPS graduates? Any? Okay. Where?
DPS teachers.
North, okay. The Vikings, we got some Vikings. You said where?
My son is East.
Your son is at East, he's an angel, okay. We can kind of let you slide with that. Yeah, I get it, proximity. So we look at East Denver right now, and there's a place called 5 Points. How many people are familiar with 5 Points? Okay, so as you know, Denver is fastly gentrifying, quickly gentrifying. And the way that I grew up, my father being an activist, I grew up on the 5 Points. That's where a lot of his organizing work took place. I knew when I saw a white woman jogging with her Afghan at 11:30 at night in yoga pants that we had lost the 5 Points. This picture kind of conjures that up for me, like this is like a latte with Becky written on it. Can you talk a little bit about why you chose that?
Well, the project, those of you who are in academia know that we constantly do edited series for journals or for books, and I wanted to do it different. This is the first time I was the editor, and I wanted to humanize the project. So my contributing authors, we were like a family in that I would, we usually get the feedback, the infamous reviewer too, who just trashes your work. Well, I trash the work, no, I'm kidding. I provide a lot of feedback, but I don't want it to just resonate there. So I actually spent time with each of my contributing authors to talk through every point. There's some points where I added, scenes to their stories and stuff. So it's a family project. And by saying that, the people who contributed, donated some artwork was my own personal family members and some of the husbands. In fact, one of the writers here, a white woman talking about being a Becky herself, her husband was Filipino, a graphic artist. He was the one who wrote this, and it is a little bit of a play off the whole pumpkin spice, you know, Starbucks holding, wielding, UGG wearing Becky. And I think the reason I do that is because we know these euphemisms here, and I want people to, it's a serious topic, don't get me wrong, because, you know, it can kill. Emmett Till, point blank, right? At the same time, I want the transmission of it to be heard. I don't want it to fall on deaf ears. And so I take an approach, both serious, both funny. I mean, there's stories there that are horror stories about terror. There's a.
You didn't contact me, by the way, because I could. That's value too. I see some people in the audience like, yeah, I could.
That was before the pre-soul
meeting. Pre-soul, I got you.
So yeah, that was about 1.5 years ago when we were doing the writing, and but yeah, it was a family project, and I want people to hear the word.
Let's dig in a little deeper. Explain to us, as if we've never, we don't know the colloquialism. Explain to us what Becky, who she is. Who is Becky?
Right. Well, I want to make it very clear. I didn't coin the term Becky. This has been kind of used and labeled and operationalized in Black communities way before. I mean, I joke around. I have another publication with a student talking that draws from Sir Mix-a-Lot, you know, not that one. Sorry, see, I'm getting all my 90s and my 80s hip hop mixed up right now because I'm on camera. What was it? No, it was Sir Becky. Her butt is so big, right? And if you really listen to the song, you know the two white
Baby
girls
Got
talking
Back.
back. Yeah, Baby Got Back. That's it. At the very before Sir Mix-a-Lot starts rapping, the interlude that's happening, at the very end she goes, "She's just so black." You know she's saying the word black, but they kind of mess it so you can't hear it, and it just becomes so this terminology, Becky, becomes this characterization of this white woman, you know, who engages in these very anti-Black violent behaviors. And racist behaviors to all. And I think in modern day, I mean, that was what, early 90s, late
91,
80s?
92?
Yeah, 1992, I think. And so nowadays, and we're talking about 2020, we're talking not only about that Becky that's been used in the Black community, but also it's been morphed into this Becky that she believes she's doing good. She counts herself as a liberal. She says, I voted for Obama. She says, but I have a Latino husband, or she adopted Black kids from Africa, or, you know, whatever the case.
Church going on back
I
here.
know, amen, right? I got the School of Theology represented in here, that's right. So, you know, it's become this characterization of a white woman who not only engages in these very racially microaggressive ways, but presents herself as someone who's actually engaging in racially just ways. So, and I think that's what you've experienced in your education department meeting, and that, again, it's beyond intention. It's the impact of those behaviors, the rhetoric, the epistemologies. It's the fact that during the Women's March here in Denver, and many women of color chose not to participate. They called women of color sellouts, not being collaborative. Oh my goodness, that word, you know? Yes, and it's like we've always done this. Bell Hooks has talked about this since Teaching to Transgress, that Black women, women of color, have always promoted the ideals of feminist ideology. But when it comes to white feminism, the intersectionality of our color has never been put to the fore. So that's, I think, the embodiment, and she engages in these nuance. It's not just like what Sir Mix-a-Lot, it's this passive aggressive tactics, it's gaslighting, it's constant rhetoric of I'm innocent, I didn't intend that, therefore I'm absolved for all the behaviors that are racist. And it is such an experience, it becomes so impactful in communities of color and for white folks who are engaging in this and do receive, you know, backlash for their work, that it's actually messing up the coalition. So.
Well, I mean, a part of it is that, and you speak about the gaslighting part, it makes you think like you're going crazy, right? Like, am I tripping? Like, is this, right? That's part of the whole mental aspect of it. I think there's an irony in that you were mentioning the aspect, or using the song "Baby Got Back." How many people are familiar with Sir Mix-a-Lot?
Oh, you better be.
Okay, all right. Even some of the younger folks, y'all keeping up. All right. What is said in that song? The irony is that that when that song was being made, there was not what you have now with the lips, the collagen lips, and the big. Now, there's been a total commodification and gravitation towards that look, right? Like the Brazilian butt, right? Then it was just like at the precipice of it. So I'm wondering, in using that as an example, there's an attraction repulsion thing going on, right? That seems to be taking place inside of this. But noting that when you're in, I hate to use the word because it's just words you're trying. When you're in intersectional groups, how do you? And I don't know if the book goes that too deep into it. Like, I had to wrestle this from the person that's selling it in back. She was like, "That's my only copy." Are there survival techniques inside of here? Is that what we can expect to get from some of what's inside of Surviving Becky? Because it does say Surviving Becky, right?
Right,
So,
absolutely.
what are how do we survive Becky?
Right. So it's not the checklist, because I can't stand when people come up to me after talking about racial justice and teaching, and they say, "So give me the checklist on how to deal with." This is what they're pretty much saying. Give me the checklist on how to deal with you people then. I'm like, I'm not giving you no checklist. I always say, do you have a checklist to deal with your mother, your partner, your best friend, who happens to be the black best friend? No, I'm kidding. You don't have a checklist for them, so why are you asking for a checklist on how to how to make humanizing relationships with other human beings?
Right.
The problem you're having is you don't see them as human beings, you know? So that's why I study whiteness, you know, because it's so much, the gaslighting, it becomes us. When I talk about surviving Becky's, I think in my own work in doing this for over 10 years, I found it, and I'm not exempt to some of the atrocities that people talk about. I know before you see Dr. Matias, you know, strong woman, but it has beat me down in a lot of ways, in ways that I had to protect my family and go to extremes to protect my family. The constant backlash, not only outside of the university, but inside, it's been extremely hurtful. But one thing that I found cathartic for me was and I'm a reflective person, is to really think about, okay, let's process this. You know, I'm not gonna bury it deep. I'm gonna do what Counseling 101 does. I'm gonna identify it. I'm gonna talk about it. I'm gonna deconstruct it. And I found that to be very cathartic. So when I did this project, I wanted twofold. You know, yes, we kind of wanna identify the behaviors of Becky's, you know, in a way that is transmittable, you know, and heard. And the second thing I really said, and I said this in the beginning in the chapter, in the introduction chapter, is I wanted it to be cathartic for folks of color, for other folks, because it's not only folks of color who have to deal with some of the times the Beckys, but really to engage in this kind of healing process by honoring their experience with it. And so often when I know I talk to other students of color, they always say, well, this is happening, it's obviously race-based, and then they'll say, but that's not racist, right? So we've been gaslighted so much so that we can't even identify our own experiences. So I wanted to pay homage to a testament, if I may, you know, draw from, you know, my church trainings. I wanted a testament to our experiences, and so that we can identify it and find a way to heal. So we might laugh. Some of them, I mean, there's a story about a 300-foot Becky who every time she cries, she grows into 300 feet and she starts crying and it floods everyone. And then the Becky response team has to come and it's all people saying, you're helping us, you know? And then she like shrinks down to size, you know? So we're laughing about it, but we take something that is very painful, we honor it, we tell the story in a way that will be heard, and in doing so, we kind of heal from it. So I really made this project because my writing has been a healing process for me, and I was hoping to push. Most of them were academics, so you know they had a hard time writing a story. I was like, no, we're not doing some don't cite.
Right.
You know,
Right.
I just wanted you to use characters and tell a story, and that's
So it reminds me, just in my own experience, not directly, but I remember I grew up in a household with my mother, single mother, who was going through Kaiser. She was an administrator in Kaiser, and there were, which is a profession of mostly white men, doctors who, and I don't know if there's anything worse as far as what you're describing as far as the psychology of greatness, the God complex, than dealing with white male doctors. And so she would come home and literally fall to pieces. I knew the names of her, the people that were bothering her at work as a child. At 9, 10, she would say their names. I would know who these people were. Has anyone in the audience, have you had that experience of seeing your parent or go through this particular, I know you've gone through, I already see the faces of those of you who are like, yo, pass me the mic. But watching your parent go through this, right? Because what we're talking about is, it's not just this last generation that's dealing with it. Like, this is something that goes back. How far do the stories go back? Do they go back into slavery, civil rights, or are these stories more modern stories that are talking about what the situations and the setups and the relationships are now?
So the stories are fiction.
Okay.
I'm paying homage to critical race theory's parables, counter storytelling, and I'm paying homage to John Preston's work on whiteness. He's over across the pond in the UK. He does work on fan fiction. So I'm paying homage to that and the storytelling that we've done in our own communities. So the stories will have a sci-fi feel to it, but they'll be eerily reminiscent of things that happened in the past. So like Derek Bell's work on Space Traders, you know, he's talking about these aliens coming in and saying, we'll restore all your resources if you just give us all your black people. And they actually have to, they're like, well, let me think about that, you know? And at the end, the saddest part is, yes, they're willing to trade human life for their own economic means, which is no different. So you're gonna see that play out throughout the stories. And when you're talking about parents, you're right. I grew up in an immigrant household, and my father was always pink-slipped. And he talked always about, getting passed up for promotions by white men, but he wouldn't want to say it, you know, because in my household, it's like we can't even say the word racism, right? So it became something.
You're saying you couldn't say it in your house. So you saying that reminds me, like, in public, when black people are talking about white people, they'll be talking, and they'll say, white people.
You know, now we just kind of go,
right.
you know.
Right? So was it that type of?
It was that type of, we've been gaslighted so much, and as immigrants, they're coming into the U.S., they want to do their best, they're first generation, and there's a lot of research in sociology. I have my social professors here as well, but there's a lot of research in segmented assimilation that the first generation can't see, not they can't see, but they don't talk about racism so much, so because they're focused on assimilating, right? That theory, and then the second generation see it more clearly, So yeah, they experienced. My dad had a hard time. God bless his soul. He is now passed. The stressors he's faced. My mom never made it to. She's a nurse. I know, total stereotype in front of you, but she couldn't move to any management as well after spending 40 years in Kaiser Permanente as well in Los Angeles. So it's become very personal, and I think. Joyce James, if anyone has read a little bit of black feminism, Joyce James has a book called Shadowboxing. Help me out, anyone know? Shadowboxing, it's written by University of Colorado Press. And she also in the beginning talks about her experience watching her parents, her dad being an officer in the Army, yet couldn't talk about certain things. And then when other black soldiers, because he would hang out with enlisted, right? And they would talk freely about the racism they experienced when they had these small house parties. So she talked about shadowboxing. We got a shadow box. We box back in the shadows, you know? And so I feel like that is so much what we live and breathe in the everyday fight for racial justice. So this book about surviving Becky's is putting it into the fore. So although we're not talking specifically about the transatlantic slave trade, they're making parallels. Someone might be going, you know, one of them I think is he gets into a trance and someone's trying to infect his brain and she's trying to do that colonization in a new way, you know? So it's very interesting. Has anyone seen Altered Carbon on Netflix? That's homework for tonight. All right, I see you in the back, you know? And so like that story where, you know, someone's consciousness, they start to suck out the consciousness of folks of color and they present it as their own. And that's what you were talking about, cultural appropriation earlier, right? So these are some aspects of Beckyisms that are happening that I thought we should focus on.
So as we, and I'm sure everyone's really excited about this upcoming election year, we know that we're going to be moving or have already started to move into a very heightened state of political, in the political environment. And it would require, it would seem, that there be intersectionality and groups needing to work with each other in order to achieve a particular end. How could this book serve as a ways and means to have a discussion or to bring to light certain behaviors that oftentimes serve to undermine true intersectionality, right? Working in true groups with each other. Before we came on camera, you were talking about Frederick Douglass and
William Lloyd Garrison.
yes, and Frederick Douglass's frustration with it, and then we know that Harriet Tubman dealt with that same frustration with, you know, dealing with some of the Quakers. How can we use this book, or can we? I'll pose both of those two as a way to move through and to form coalition to form authentic intersectionality amongst groups.
Absolutely. Before I became a professional nerd with the PhD, I was a teacher, and I've always been a teacher. And so the way I wrote this book is more pedagogical. So you have the reason why I wrote the stories is so that it can be more storytelling learning. Here's the moral of the story. In fact, the way this book is designed is that there's a grouping of 3 stories that kind of hit at a main theme. But before you even get into the story, there's an intro expository writing that gets into the nerdy, you know, like, this is what's happening. Let me tell you what's up. You know, here are the terminologies. This is the behaviors. This is the literature on it so far. You know, so people have access. Then they get into the stories. They understand the moral of each story. They're usually like grouped in 2 or 3s. And then at the end, there's actually questions. You know, questions for folks of color who are surviving this. At the same time, there's specific questions for white women. So it says, for white women, consider this. You know, is your emotions, like, for example, when you're feeling emotionally discomfort, do you feel like you need to have it made better by folks of color? You know, why is that?
So there's a heavy decolonizing element that's involved with that as well.
So it becomes a teaching tool because I want the people to read this. You know, there's multiple ways. You know, folks of color, I'm sure, are going to read and they're going to laugh. They're going to, you know, catharsis and all of that. And at the same time, folks who are really like, well, I don't want to be a Becky, you know, hopefully they'll read this and they'll use the questions to guide them in their own, you know, consciousness.
So, and then I want to get some questions from people in the audience as well. Is this, I often reflect upon Tim Weiss, right? And before Tim Weiss gives his lectures, most of them, he says, I'm not going to say anything to you that black people haven't been trying to tell you for about 100 or so years now, right? Or longer. With this book, it's coming from, I suspect, people of color. who are telling many of the stories in here. Are there white authors in here that are saying, where there's some sort of recognition of their impact on their environments, that those that are coming into the work will be able, that our white allies and accomplices will be able to say, okay, this is something that I can identify with. I've seen this happen, or...
Right. Yes,
Okay.
there are white authors in there, and interesting, one of them is text. She shows text messages, and she writes a diary, and she talks about how she keeps Beckying, despite her best efforts. I thought this was the right way, that she needed to speak up, or if she can't, I'm going to speak up, but then it put the faculty of color in a worse position. So yeah, there was another one who talked about losing a really good friend of color. And she reflected on her own behaviors and said, man, this is where it is. I actually do want to follow up with her later to talk, to see, how she might have, atoned for that behavior. Because there's so often we talk about forgiveness, right? And we can forgive the transgression, right? Those who trespass us, right? Yet at the same time, what do those people do to atone for their wrongdoings? So I think for women, white women who've engaged in these transgressions, you'll see some in the book. How do you continue to atone for that? Because you can say, "Oh, my bad. I won't do that again." Good, but you done wrong by someone, and I know we can forgive, but that'll never forget. And so I always talk about the responsibility is for someone who's transgressed us to atone for that type of wrongdoing. So,
and last piece before we go to the audience. I grew up in Denver, and so for me, I feel like Denver is the quintessential place where they made Becky. Like if there's a Becky making machine, it's like right here in 5280, right? Because Becky's progressive, she's liberal, she's right, and everything that people in Denver claim to be, right? Whereas down south, it's much clearer conversation taking place, right? A book like this would seem to be of extreme value in environments like Denver, and even more specifically in environments like academia or in school, right, where I saw, not to give away what's in the book, but there's a piece where it's assumed in Western culture and white culture that white people already know that they're the leaders of whatever room we walk into, whatever endeavor we're talking about, whatever, right? It would seem like this is a perfect book. And I'm not selling it for you, but I mean, if you want to give me kickback, that's fine too. But it seems like this would be the perfect book for this particular environment, right? And these liberal environments, not so much necessarily down south because they're clear, but liberal environments. Was when you were writing that, or when you were putting this together, was that your intention? Was that your audience that you were looking for?
You know what, Sol, I'm so glad you asked that. Abso-fucking-lutely. Am I allowed to say that? Oh.
This is your show.
Okay, all right. Just kidding. You wanted 100. It absolutely was. Colorado, Denver, Colorado. Granted, I lived in New York and the DC area in LA. I'm a city girl. Coming to Colorado was a big difference for me. And some of my students jokingly call it color blanco, in that it has this unique experience. I was forced into a sequestered meeting once without a mentor present or anyone from the diversity committee, having to say good things to a white male who felt I called him a racist, despite the fact that the white assistant professor was the one saying, nah, I called you a racist, but still attributed it to me. And so I remember in that dialogue, he said, well, I'm not a racist because I'm not from the South and I'm not a neo-Nazi. And I walked in the civil rights. He was an older gentleman and well respected in the education in Denver. And I sat there and said, Honestly, I was like Janet Jackson. I said, "What have you done for me lately?"
Right.
You know?
60s was a while ago.
Right, 60s was a while ago, brother. And so I heard him say that, and I was, all these things were firing off at the same time. One is like, how you disrespect my Southerners like that? In fact, I know there's authors like Ricky Lee Allen who's written a chapter on what about poor white people? And he talks about white people, you know, that they're actually better aligned with black folks than white middle class America, you know? So he talks about that and how people turn against their own interests because of this allure of being into the privilege of whiteness. And so absolutely, when you say, did I have this context in mind? Absolutely, because what I've had the most difficulty with, and I think Martin Luther King said this in one of his quotes, wasn't the racist, the blatant racist in and of themselves. It was these people, these liberal.
The white moderate.
The white moderate, that's what he called it. Or what we'll call the white liberals who have voted for Obama. They dated a Latino guy and they adopted black children. Those people here in Denver that have continually say they know what's best for folks like me. And I remember my first year here in Colorado, having taught in New York, in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and in South LA, growing up on the east side of Los Angeles County, them saying, and having a PhD in race and ethnic studies, you know, in education from UCLA, whoop, whoop, Bruin. And I found it so interesting that there were 3 liberal white professors, all who embody this, and a man, a Chad. So
that's the counterpart
that's
to
the
Becky.
counter, Becky,
Chad.
yes, Chad.
Yeah, okay.
So there were Chads and Beckys sitting there and telling me, well, you need to live this because you don't understand urban education in Denver context. I was like, yeah, okay, I'll give you that, you know, because I did think there was going to be buffalo running around when I first landed. I did. I did bring sneakers because of that. Right. I didn't know that. Stereotypes, there you go, right? But it was so funny and I believed it. The saddest thing is my 3rd year as a professor, I started to believe it, that I didn't know. And that's why I was like, no more will you try to mess up the racial reality of folks of color and dilute it with this delusion of yours, because I know, I was born and raised in it, you don't. And so it became, this book is specific to this area, to this climate, to people who believe themselves doing this work, but in the end do more harm to folks of color than they think they do.
I heard it once stated, helping is the new hurting, right? You have a few questions that I want to, now some of y'all with this writing now, I'm gonna make y'all read your own questions, right?
Those are the doctoral students.
Right, they're just like, first question, in what ways does the book recycle and perpetuate whiteness? And I think the second part of this is, how might Black, Indigenous people of color disrupt and challenge those moments in their lives in a safe manner?
Well, you know, I think it's funny because you brought up Tim Weiss earlier, and there's the discussion of whiteness has been around since Du Bois, since 1903. It's been talked about in the 60s by Baldwin, has been analyzed by Frantz Fanon in 1967. I mean, this is nothing, you're right, this is nothing new. But with respects to recycling whiteness, I disagree. Recycling whiteness is what I would call whiteness studies, where they're constantly looking at ways to just make whites aware. I don't do that in this book. I believe whites done known. You know,
Been known.
Been known.
They've been known.
Right? So it's such an interesting thing for me to say, like I don't operate under this epistemological stance where, well, I just got to let them know. I just have to help them raise their racial awareness, which is a lot of studies out there, which I believe recycles whiteness. It's constantly like, I'm just ignorant, I need to learn. I don't believe in that. You know, Charles Mills talked a lot about how racial ignorance is an active, you know, epistemology, in that it is a way to, an active strategy to release your culpability in your behaviors of racism, you know, and it aligns with the racial contract. And so I always say, so then tell me, why don't you drive through 5 Points? I wasn't even from here. I already knew by the reactions that, because I was going to do some trip, and I live in Skyland area, which is a little bit south of, And I was like, oh, we're going to travel through 5 Points because I love Welton Street Cafe. That's my plug for my girl over there. And they were.
Do the black students not from here, do you know where Welton Street Cafe is? Look, they're like, yeah.
Oh, okay, right.
All right, just make sure you're getting some, in case you're missing home, just making sure you're all right.
It was so crazy because of the fact that I didn't even know. I just knew I liked the food, honestly, and I knew some folks there that I had met in the community. So I said, oh, we're going to go there. We're going to talk to the community. It's near my community. Whatever, we'll walk. And the reaction of my mostly at that time all white teachers were like, I was like, oh, from your reaction, I think that's a black community. I'm not even from here. I'm from LA, you know.
But you can feel it.
Yeah, and I said, why didn't you bring your black boyfriend, your Latina boyfriend home? Why couldn't you sleep overnight at your Latina best friend? Why do you keep saying you have a black best friend and you don't know their name? You know what I mean? Why do you think you have this kinship or a friendship with a faculty of another colleague of color when that colleague's like, nah? You know? So it becomes, I think for me, it's, I work on these operations. I get this panel. I'm very touchy because I was on a panel once.
It got you fired up.
Yeah,
I like
because
it,
I was in a
it's good
panel,
question.
I believe 7 years ago, and it was all white women, and then there was me. And I was the only one from a white person in the audience got the question, how are you not recycling whiteness? And I was like, and that question was directed to the only person of color on the panel. I was like, are you for real? Are you for real? And you're not going to give that question to the other white folks in the panel who may say, oh, well, nothing's new. I took it from the, whatever. So it becomes an important thing where the distinction is made. I don't do whiteness studies. And you cannot say that I recycle by calling out, not like in a bad call out, because there's some bad call out social justice. Well, I won't even call that social justice, right? But I do it in a way to identify and educate, from a person of color perspective. I'm rooted in, I'm not citing Peggy McIntosh, And so I think it's important that that be heard and understood in the work that I do.
I love that dialogue and that conversation, especially from an academic perspective, because one, it got you fired up. I can feel that, right? Because
I'm trying to keep my composure and my angles.
There's an experience there, though, right? There's an experience there, right? There's of dismissal, right? That you're perpetuating something that's been, right, that is negative.
I mean, let's be honest. When you think nationally, who does the work on white privilege, it's not my name, right? So don't tell me I'm recycling whiteness. You know what I mean? You've got some folks who don't even have a PhD, and they get paid 30 G's to go talk about something, and I'm a woman of color trying to fight for a grand, So, well, this is free because I love to hear.
My peeps, right.
So, but you know what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
So don't be telling me I'm the one benefiting from this, at the end of the day. I'm doing this because at the end of the day, I don't want my kids to internalize any notion that they are less than by the color of their skin and the shape of their eyes. So.
Amen. All right, so I'm going to take a shot at whoever wrote this, right? And just don't trip. All right, it says, white upper middle class femininity often rejects and requires nicety as a presentation and performance of gender. And then you got real small. These are 45-year-old eyes here. A response to white male privilege plus performing expected roles within the system. There's a question coming, I'm sure. In what ways does calling out Becky's reinforce the divide and conquer strategy of those with power? Wow, that's almost a very similar question, isn't it? That's so, all right, I'm gonna let you answer the question, but I think it's very interesting that the two questions that we've received, both of them kind of are in the vein of why you talking about this, right? Like,
right.
What's up with you talking? Not that that's the intent, I'm
right,
just saying,
right.
but it's That's the vein that it's coming in. But did you get the question?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And there's some niceties and stuff like that. I think, speaking truth to power is never easy. And those who have been culpable for engaging in some of those behaviors, and especially if they have power, don't like to be called out on that, And again, I don't do this work to quote unquote call out, specific white girls. It's not that. At the end of the day, I want better coalition, I want better understanding, and I want to be able to help in racially just education. So if this is a way to say, look, I'm not going to tiptoe around your sensibilities so that you can try to learn. I'm going to go straight to the elephant in the room so that you can learn.
Wouldn't you have to be a particular type of gangster white woman, though, to pick up this book, Surviving Becky's and Me, like, just some light reading, let me learn about, right? Like, if you're fragile, which Becky's tend to be, right? That's part of their makeup, as you outline here. Wouldn't the title alone cause some repulsion on their part? And is that intended? Or do you only want those white folks that are about it, right? That are reading the work, that are digging in, and don't mind, having uncomfortable conversations and moving through their fragility? Is that the type of white person that you foresee engaging with this work?
I see every white person intending that. I don't care if you gift it to them or you slide it under their door, say, some reading that I think you need to read. Prescription from the PhD doctor.
Right.
At the end of the day, and I've been talked about this, like people saying, well, can't you meet where whites are at? Or, I'm tired of candycoating.
It's so just to pause. It's so funny when you're talking, just the size and the there really is church going on here, right? Let the church say amen.
Amen.
Right?
I am tired of candycoating the topic.
You talked about this boxing from the shadow phenomena, right?
Exactly.
And that has to be exhausting too, though, right? To box from the shadow, right?
I'm not gonna box from the shadow. I did everything you asked me to. I got the BA, I got the MA, I got the teaching credential. I taught in all urban cities. I did the PhD. I did all you asked me to do. Don't tell me to curb my tongue. I tell you, you write the way you want about black and brown students. You use the stats of Denver's dropout rates, right, with Latino males not graduating, yet you use no racial theory to analyze your work. So you're using our bodies, our statistics, us as data for your gains. So when I say that I am going to write with honesty and justice, and I'm not going to candy coat it, because your fragilities or emotionalities are so unfettered, I don't care. Life is happening, death is happening, and I want to make sure that we get to the point, and now. That's it.
Wow.
Oh, I'm sorry. See, I had my legs crossed.
Did you get that? Were we rolling?
Composed.
Okay, all right.
I was composed. My hair is straight right
But
now. It's about to curl up.
So I think I think what you're hitting on, and you laid out beautifully, right? It reminds me, just hearing you talk reminds me of the poem, Ain't I a Woman, right? Like just all of the bending and the navigating and these pieces. And so in hearing you describe this book, it sounds like it was extremely liberating for you as well, like it's a piece of liberation.
Yes.
Can you talk about that piece of it?
Absolutely. I think, and I have a different racialization. I have to be honest. I'm Pinay. I'm proud to be Filipina. I am a statistical majority in California.
Right.
In fact, next to English and Spanish, Tagalog is the most spoken language. I want to represent. I know I get racially confused as Latina or Asian Americans, and based upon that racialization, I get treatments different. So, But if they assume that I'm Asian American, I cannot stand this whole niceties, like I should always be submissive. And the minute that I actually, you know, not even just be aggressive or any, because that's not even truth, right? The minute I assert my knowledge for which I was hired to do, all of a sudden I'm positioned as disobedient, you know? And that I should just nod my head to certain things. So yes, it is extremely liberating to do the work that I do in the way that I want to. And I can say, I can drop the mic right now and say, I've done it justice. Because at the end of the day, I know they tell academics, they tell junior scholars all the time to, you know, save it till you're tenured. And I couldn't do that. I was standing on the backs of too many folks before me. And I could not, in good justice, bow my head down in that kind of way. So in order to honor the many women of color, the many scholars of color, the many activists of color who stood before me and did this work, including my grandmother, who used to fight for UTLA and then Los Angeles Teachers Union.
Who just, by the way, got its first Black woman or woman of color
Exactly.
as the president.
As the president,
so shout
right?
out to you too.
So you get all this. I cannot get to the position where I am and not say it as it is, because I'm paying homage, and that book is actually dedicated to my grandmother. I called her Carmeli. Because at the end of the day, I think about myself. My dissertation was at UCLA was called "Where Are You Really From?" You know, I think you know where I get that. You know, and I got that story when I was in kindergarten. A white teacher who was doing the roll call, and we had to say we're present. She couldn't pronounce my last name, so she said, you know, oh, well, you're not from here. Where are you from? I said, I'm from LA. It's a big thing in immigrant families to be the firstborn in America. You know, our parents are like saying, no, you're American. You're American. Speak English. No. And that's language side happened. I don't speak Tagalog because of that. It's a huge familial line. And so for her, at the end, I was saying I was from the Philippines, even though I've never been there at the time, you know. And she never met me where I was at. So why are we always coddling teachers or white people to meet where they're at? Because if you provide a crutch, they're never going to get it. So it is extremely liberating for me to write this book. It's inspired by a Becky in my life, and I'm sure as you read it, it'll be a motivating force of the Beckys in your life.
Right. So the last part of that question, it says, your subtitle, I think, addresses gender and whiteness. What is the role of class?
Yes, you know, it would have been a much longer book. So I did focus on gender and race. Don't get me wrong, class, sexuality, ableism is a very important, immigration, national status is a big aspect, especially in my own family. But for the purpose of this book, I had to cut it. So.
And it says, how is Karen different than Becky?
You know, that's a new one I'm going to have to study.
Right.
But I do talk a little bit about the old characterizations of Miss Anne. You know, Miss Anne was the moral woman, yet sat on the porch preaching the Bible, but, you know, having her slaves whipped, you know. So I know I talk a little bit about that, these characterization changes. And it's by no means I'm trying to start a field on critical Becky studies. I'm not saying that. I know people have said that. I'm not starting that, you know. It's a characterization that I'm using to understand more of the dynamics of race and gender. But I don't know. I think it's just Karen, I think at the time there was barbecue Becky, there was backpack Becky, there was let me see your keys, do you really live in this condo Becky, you know. That phenomenon was happening in such a realm, and I had to pay homage to Dr. Michael Dumas, who's at UC Berkeley. You know, we used to rap a lot and just joke around about Becky's as professors in education, him being a black man in UC Berkeley, and me being over at UC Denver. So it was just something that I thought, a phenomenon. Let's explore it if we're still talking about it.
So my final question would be, what is your highest hope for this writing?
I think my highest hope is always the hope that I had for Colorado. You know, I came here bright-eyed, bushy-tailed. I was young. I was like 30-something, you know, at the time. And I really wanted to do my best for the community, for Denver, for the state of Colorado, in giving them a more racially just education for urban students of color. And in that, you know, supporting the better preparation for teachers statewide. And so my hope is still that despite how it may rub someone in the way I engage in the work or the way I write about my work, or because my persona is scary, some people like to say I'm threatening. I'm 5 feet tall, 5'3" today. And whatever transgressions have miscommunications or rumors or whatever has transpired, I think at the end of the day, my hope is that you can come to at least listen, and I hope that you have heard. That's what I've wanted to give for Colorado for over 10 years, and I'm hoping I can always give it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Can we get a round of applause for Dr. Cheryl Matias? So, would you like to get, how can people access and reach you and find you? And
You know, just email me, text me, Facebook me, whatever, you know.
Okay.
I think students are always like surprised here at DU because I'm like, yeah, you know, just text me, and it's better, it's faster. They're like, what? So yeah, you know, I tried to tweet, I can't tweet, it was too much work. I tried to Insta, I can't Insta, it's too much work. I think I do have a Twitter, I don't even look at it, but I do Facebook, so you can email cheryl.matias@du.edu. My personal email is Cheryl Matias, PhD, that's who I am. And please, you know, holler out. I'm down.
That's
I'm looking
awesome.
forward to teaching the Whiteness class here at DU, my first time.
when is that?
That's spring quarter in a couple weeks. Hopefully we go face to face. If not, I will find something fun for us to do online. And so I've done it for almost 4 or 5 years at UC Denver. And I'm really looking forward to bringing it to my new family here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So are you going to stick around? Can people?
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Let's go.
All right, wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.